Retraining of Racehorses is British horse racing's official charity for the welfare of racehorses who have retired from racing. These wonderful animals can put their intelligent minds to so many different pursuits. These are just some of them.
Well, good evening and a very warm welcome to this third of 4 sessions in the 2020 Virtual Showcase by RoR. This evening, we'll be following on from last night's session. For those of you that were with me for that, we looked into sourcing, assessing and the early retraining. Tonight, we take a little bit more of an advanced approach, moving into the third stage and meeting with industry professionals on this very webinar to discuss the versatility and suitability of former racehorses to a new career in whatever discipline you might choose. Tonight, we'll be joined by panelists who will describe what they look for when sourcing and producing a horse for their particular discipline, and we'll be covering everything from conformation to temperament and the natural attributes that make an ex-racehorse perfect for these very disciplines. Last night, I was joined by some great panelists, and it's another great lineup again this evening. I'm really happy to be joined by 4 of the best from 4 very different disciplines. The first of those, David Ingle. David is a senior judge on many showing panels and the former chair of judges for the British Show Horse, Association. In addition, he chairs the Showing Council, and as a director of showing at Hickstead, he oversees the showing sections at both the Al Shirah Derby meeting and the BHS Royal International Horse Show. He previously worked with point-to-point horses as well as a rider and trainer, and we'll be looking forward to speaking to him about his expertise in the showing ring. Our dressage panellist here is Cara Hayward. She's a freelance dressage rider and trainer based on the Oxfordshire-Gloucestershire border. She is the senior chef to keep to the British Junior and Young Rider Dressage team, formerly, and she's now the team manager for the RoR Dressage Display team. She hosts a number of our RoR clinics, and she's listed on the British Dressage Trainers database. Our resident eventer on this very panel is Daniel Bizzarro. He is the Italian event rider, and he spent a number of years with the legend William Fox Pitt. Now, on his own, he's set up on the Gloucestershire-Oxfordshire border as well, clearly a good location. And he now runs his yard with a whole host of event horses that he rides for some very loyal owners. He's also an instructor, and in 2014, he won the RoR Elite Eventing Championship Award with the former racehorse Squadron Leader, owned by Jane Arnold. Finally, we round up with David Morley. David brings the polo flavour to this evening's webinar, and he was brought up on a farm in Hertfordshire, is from a showing and racing background, but then moved into specialising in polo and has really trained a number of very good polo ponies over the years. He started training them in the late 70s and moved to West Sussex in 1982. From there, he specialised in retraining thoroughbreds, mostly former racehorses, for polo, and has since been long associated with Carlos Grazia, and has also produced the legendary Chesney, the champion pony, in 3 British Opens. So apologies for that very long introduction, but I think important to cover the expertise and the credentials behind our 4 brilliant panelists who join me this evening. Before we go any further, viewers, it's all about you tonight as it was last night. So please do get involved. You can submit questions and you can put them in the usual place if you're used to Zoom. I think you must be by now. We've been Zooming for months. But you can, and please do send in your questions as we go along. We've got 2 questions to ask our panelists, which were pre-submitted, but we will have some time at the end to go back and fill in with some questions that you might think of as we go along. So please do submit them in the Q&A box, and I'll try and get through them as quick as possible and as thoroughly as possible as the time allows at the end of the webinar. So before we go any further, it's time to have a look at another video. And this video is just a great summary, really, of the diversity of the thoroughbred to the various disciplines. Well, that great video there, I think, just highlights what's, even though we've already been doing that in the past 2 sessions, but I think that video really just highlight the diversity of the thoroughbred and the variety of disciplines that we can, of course, enjoy with them. And with that in mind, we're going to start our discipline chat, if you like, in the showing world. So we're going to go to David Ingle. David is senior judge on many showing panels, so definitely knows what to look for. The 2 questions that we were sent in that I think I'm going to bring to you, David. The first of them discusses a topic which you'll be more than aware of in the showing world, because it actually talks about feeding. So the question is, what advice would you give to someone taking on a thoroughbred in relation to feeding with a view to be going showing? Now, this issue is bigger than just thoroughbreds, because the feeding, the condition topic in showing has really stretched across all the breeds involved, hasn't it? So what advice would you give to someone looking to go showing that needs some feeding advice?
Well, you're right. You're right. You say it goes across. It's every horse goes across every discipline, as well as showing. But actually, taking on a thoroughbred, feeding is a very, very important part to consider, and it's something that you need to understand what you're feeding. It's very difficult today because the feed companies do such a good job. Their marketing is excellent. The content of their feeds is excellent, but it can be very baffling to somebody who probably doesn't understand the basics of feeding, or maybe they do, but today it's harder. In my day, we started off feeding straights or separates, and built our own feeds, and the modernisms and the modern developments mean it's a sort of off-the-shelf bag that can look very sexy, and you know, do I have this, do I have that, do I have this balancer or that balancer? Balancers didn't exist in my day, so it was very pure and simple. And I think understanding what goes into the feed first of all, because these horses are moving from being very, very, very physically active every single day of their lives and very high protein feeds into very different working environments. So first of all, you've got to understand what you're going to do with them, what work are they doing, and that change needs to be managed very carefully. So professional advice, or from somebody, and by professional I mean either feeding people who really know through the feed companies, and there are all feed companies have very good people you can talk to, or there's people that are professional in their field and they will have very good advice to give you as well. So it's understanding what work you're going to do and what you're then going to feed, but also not just hard feed. I think people are quite frightened when it comes to feeding, or that's been my experience occasionally with thoroughbreds. They tend to think that, you know, if they feed them, they're going to go nuts. That's not the case. It depends what you feed them and what work you're going to do with them. You know, if you carried on feeding them, for instance, the kind of diet they're on whilst in full training, and then just hacked them out, you would be very quickly on some very live wires. So you've got to understand what work you're doing and the routine. And the routine is different for feeding in a day-to-day yard or even a professional showing yard than it would be, you know, say Nicky Henderson's, for instance. You know, any big racing yard would be very different to any other discipline type of yard. So you have to understand what you're going to feed, when you're going to feed it, and get to know the horse. That's quite important. Each horse is different as well. So, you know, maybe when you're taking the horse on, you know, that would be some questions. You know, how does the horse react to various feeds? Is there things I should avoid? Is it good with some stuff and not others? Some horses like to eat quite a lot of hay if it's good quality, and others prefer to eat haylage. Obviously, you can't feed as much haylage because of the nutritional value. It depends whether the horse is spending more time out in the field or whether it's in the stable. It all sounds very simple, but actually, people taking on one horse on their own at home, or maybe 2, with a friend, or a mother and daughter, or father and son, or whatever, you know, it's a very different environment. So the feeding has to be thought out end to end, and the whole day, and the whole 24-hour cycle. So get really good advice and understand what's in your feeds, because you need to understand that.
For sure. And I think the thing that probably makes the thoroughbred quite complicated in this condition topic, at least, is that they really do vary, don't they? I mean, I think even more so than other breeds in some ways, because they've got a unique ability to go very poor looking very quickly, especially in the winter months. And then they've got a real knack of blowing up like a balloon and becoming very good doers, some of them, in the summer. So it's balancing, isn't it, in terms of the time of year as well?
Yeah, time of year, because obviously depending on how much time they're spending outside, or, you know, or what sort of hay you're on, you know, one bale of hay can be different to another bale of hay. So it's important you get your hay tested when you buy it in batches to understand how good it is and what the nutritional value is in it, because it is very, very important. It can differ wildly, as can haylage, but your haylage supply will pretty much know what's in it and will have had it tested. And yeah, thoroughbreds, arguably are harder to keep weight on because they're a very athletic animal and they're used to being very fit and have come from a very fit environment. But no horse should be overweight, and that also, and no horse needs to be poor either. So if your horse is really struggling to maintain its condition or improve its condition, then obviously you need to consult with a professional. Get your vet to have a look as well. Probably not a bad idea if you're concerned, because there could be some underlying health issues and you want to rule those out first. But horses should be fit rather than fat. They can be well covered and well conditioned, and you can put extra muscle on and you can manage that. So it comes back again to what work is that horse having? Is it regular work? Is it fitting work? Is it strength and conditioning work? It's all very, very important. You need to make a plan. If you're going to run a marathon yourself, or you're going to go into a weightlifting competition, heaven forbid, that wouldn't be up my street. But I'd have a plan. I wouldn't just eat my head off and just lift like hell. I mean, I would have a plan, and I'd be building up to something. It's a strategic plan, and it's not complicated, and we shouldn't be frightened of it, and we shouldn't be frightened of reaching out for help. The RoR have got some great access to great information. There's some on their website. There are area people who can help you as well. There are the feed companies. There's other professionals in the field. There's some here tonight, who are people. I'm sure if someone said, "Oh, can you help me? Could you have a look at this? This is what I do." I'm sure they're willing to say, "Oh, yes, of course. Let's have a look." It's about sharing experiences and knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. And some really good advice there. And I think just for anybody that missed yesterday's webinar, Dr. Jenny Hall, who joined us, the former Chief Veterinary Officer for the BHA, she was discussing the issues of feeding and also the gastric ulcer issue in particular related to that. So well worth going back and having a look at that. David, just to move on now to a little bit more of a sport topic as such now in the showing discipline, a little bit more specifically. What do you think, the question is, what do you think is the most important part to retraining a racehorse for showing? Again, this is probably going to vary because of course there's a lot of variance in showing from your in hand to your working hunters, but do you want to just go ahead and just give us a brief introduction to what things you think are most important to each of those areas when you're retraining a racehorse?
Yeah, depending on what stage you get it. If we take it that you take it straight out from training, or even it's had a break and out of grasp and comes in, I mean, it's patience really is the key thing. Patience and time, and establishing a new routine. Horses thrive on routine, and they take time to adjust. So first of all, you've got to let them tell you when they're ready. You can't force these things. Not with any horse. I mean, thoroughbred particularly, because they're so intelligent. I'm completely biased when it comes to the thoroughbred, and I admit that. But they are wonderful creatures, and they are blessed with amazing intelligence and quick wit and thought processes. So you have to be very patient and listen. And then anything you're introducing, lateral work is something that takes time. It's a big change when you think what they've been doing, probably literally from foals having been walked, ready for sales, etc., or yearlings, and then broken, possibly raced at 2 or not. National hunt, obviously not, but some will come from flat and international hunt. So that, depending on where they've come from, they will have all had done pretty much the same work in varying forms, which is going to be completely different to what you want to do to go into showing. So we need to, obviously slow everything down, but give the horse time to think and adjust and be very clear with our messaging, and any work that you're introducing needs to be done in a very calm and professional manner, and get some help. You need somebody on the floor. You need someone to watch you and to tell you what's happening, what they see, as well as does that match with what you feel. So it is all about what you feel underneath you, and listening and waiting and having patience. Some horses, take time to settle. And the show ring obviously is all about, discipline's different, but showing is just trying to be the best in class. It's trying to be the best exhibit of that type. And a thoroughbred show horse, thoroughbreds have been brilliant at showing for forever. That's not a new thing, but racing, the amount we see coming through from racing obviously is increasing year on year. And now some of them are moving very, very successfully into open company, which is fantastic. In Australia, for instance, I mean, all the show horses come off the track. And in South Africa too, that happens a lot. So it's a question of establishing a new routine, taking time to introduce them to new techniques. Depending on how they've been backed and introduced to their racing career, will soon tell you how quickly they pick up what you're trying to do with them, because everyone has their own way of backing horses, and you weren't there when they were backed, so you have to wait, and you'll soon understand. They soon remember these things, but you have to give them time to understand what you're asking them. And sometimes you have to ask them, quite a lot. Keep asking, but be very clear with the messaging and just repeat, and it comes. And when it comes, they normally they don't forget. They've got it. So routine, patience, and confidence. Really, be confident in what you're doing. They'll look to you for some confidence. Like we look to other people for confidence, they will look to somebody. You are the person they spend all their time with all of a sudden, and they're going to seek some confidence from you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you mentioned a good point there that's showing, I mean, there's a lot of very good thoroughbreds that have gone through the ranks. I think a lot of that has been helped by the initiatives that have been done as well to get horses through the ranks. And they've obviously gone on partnerships with RoR, and they've obviously, some of them gone on to the likes of Horse of the Year show and things. And that's great to see. Just as a final question, this is more from me really. Is there any logic to, obviously disclosure, not a showing person, more on Dan's side of the fence on this one, or eventing, but in the showing world, would there be any logic behind thinking that these racehorses are probably well suited to starting off it if you want to go to a new competition? Maybe a bit of in-hand showing would quite suit some of these horses, because obviously they have paraded around parade rings for probably a few years.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the wonderful thing about showing is it's very, very accessible. And in-hand showing is incredibly accessible with very limited training, as in the riding side. So it's a great way to build a partnership up with that animal, and for you to gain confidence and trust in it and it in you. So yes, I'd say it's a fantastic place to start, as is showing in general, because it allows you to have some time to get to know your horse. You've got safety in numbers. The horse is used to the parade ring, as you say. It's used to being in numbers. The tannoy, we hear, causes some problems, because some horses, remember that they hear the tannoy at a show and they get very lit up. But I think that's marginal, and obviously it can be worked on, and there's things you can do to help that and work on that. And I'm sure that's the same for Cara and Dan and David as well with their disciplines. So the triggers on some horses that take them back, and suddenly they're a racehorse again. But that all comes down to the training and repeat, and then they trust and they know, and it's good. But it's a great place to start. And RoR have had some fantastic initiatives, and they've been very resolute in driving them through and saying, this can be done, this can happen. And the RoR showing classes are phenomenal. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. They take your breath away. The standard now is incredibly high. It always was, but the standard of production has just gone up and up and up, and it is something to behold. So it's very impressive.
Absolutely. And I mean, the championships at Aintree over the last couple of years as well, the showing championships there have just exploded in numbers. I mean, I've been studying the parade rings. They've had to extend the showing rings, and it's great to see it. And there's some really brilliant horses that have gone from racing, actually successful race horses that are having a really good career. And actually, you've got quite a few high profile horses that have moved across as well, because Q Card, for example, is one that's come across to you. So David, that's really helpful. Thank you. There'll be a couple of questions hopefully that come in for you a little bit later on, but for now we're going to sidestep. It's quite a good transition actually, this one. We're going to dressage. So we still need calm, serenity, and Cara's going to bring us that, aren't you, Cara? The first of your questions relates to the muscles of the horse, because when people think of dressage, they obviously will think of these warm bloods dancing around the arena with huge extravagant movement. However, you and I are going to champion the thoroughbred here, because it's not all about that movement, is it? And the first question is, this lady's asked, I'm struggling to develop the muscles my horse needs for the work I want to do with him in the dressage arena. What can I do to help? And is there any way I can improve movement? So there's your start.
Okay. So I will actually just very gently brush on what David has said about feeding, because for me, actually, the muscle development will start a little bit from the feeding. So just make sure, utilize the feed companies, the professionals that are in that. They love communication in the chat. So just re-emphasizing that, that's a great starting place. Okay, then you have the thoroughbred that we'll just move on now from how they have used their muscles on the track, and now we're redeveloping their muscles and how they're utilized. So I am a great believer in cross training with my horses. So yes, I where dressage is the theme and we want to develop the top line, which maybe in the racing industry isn't quite as important, maybe a little bit more so now. So I like to start the racehorses off slowly. I give them time and patience, trying to force them into an outline or a position which is unnatural for them, will cause tension through their muscles. And also mentally, they are really intelligent, switched on animals. And it's really important that we change their muscle development slowly, and gently, and in a way that they are comfortable in doing so. So I like to start them, a lot of them will hack out really well. I like to start them with some hill training. So walking up hills, long and low, asking them to press, use their top line. And then I will start some jog trot up there, no pressure. I'm not pushing them together. I'm just asking them to change where they're maybe to seek a little bit lower in their top line, without the pressure of an environment of the arena, which is a new environment for them. You know, a lot of these racehorses, of course, are trained in straight lines. Their muscles and what we're going to ask them to do and the stretch through them is really going to change. So hill work, nice and straight, stretching, not too much pressure for them, and asking them to start using those trapezius muscles over their back, and really pushing through their glutes in a different way. So moving on from that, then I'll just gently take them into the arena, and I would over time start doing some raised trot poles with them. So start on the ground, really basic, and then I'll just raise them again within their comfort zone. I don't like to, I like them to be confident to each level and them almost be telling me, right, what's next, as opposed to me forcing them to say, right, we're going to be doing this now. Really keep developing and building their confidence. And that really helps with the movement development. Trot isn't a pace in the racing industry which is really focused on. They'll walk to the gallops, and sometimes they'll do a little bit of road work and a bit of a jog or a little bit of trot, but it's not a pace that they really know how to utilize their bodies and use. So that does take a little bit more time to develop. But the great thing about the trot is you can develop the trot. They're not the biggest movers. Well, some of them are not the biggest movers in the world, but you can really improve that pace with the correct muscle development, the cross training of the muscles, using pole work, hill work. All of my horses actually go up the gallop still once a week, but they're in an in-hand canter, long and low, slow, in control most of the time. But that, for me, again, it's really important. I don't like to fry their brains in the arena. And I think it's so important when we're, not only for the muscles, but the tendons and the ligaments in their legs, to have them on different surfaces and work them over that top line in non-pressurized environments. It's very easy to chuck a pair of draw reins on and force them into something, and generally they're very willing horses, but all too many times that backfires and people think it's a quick fix, and actually it's just it makes a much longer path, undoing it, the damage that can be caused by using those extra those techniques.
Absolutely. So patience, really, a big message there. You actually touched on something there which leads into the next question that's coming your way. And this one I think we can actually then lead on to Dan as well with, because this one comes down to the breed issue. This lady has sent a question in for us, and it says, I always feel intimidated in the dressage warm-up arena by the big warmbloods and feel I'm going to lose even before I begin. How can I overcome this, and are thoroughbreds actually suited to dressage? I think we all just need to probably eradicate a bit of a myth here, because of course the top level dressage does have a lot of warmbloods with huge movement. Eventing's got quite a few of those too. But I've never, Cara, you're more of an expert than I am, but I have never met a dressage judge which has specifically said to me, I do not like thoroughbreds. It's more about if people actually look at the tests where those thoroughbreds didn't score particularly highly, you could probably, yes, of course, they might not be overly extravagant to get a 10, but you could probably pick out issues such as tension or riding the test perhaps not as correct as they could or as accurately. So maybe you can help me here and put more an expert eye on this, but it kind of isn't really just as simple as thoroughbreds can't do dressage and warmbloods can, is it?
No. And you know, I'll hold my hands up. Years ago, before I had taken a thoroughbred on, I was guilty of that, of going to the warm-up and thinking, oh God, here we go again. And I thought, right, I have got to change my mindset here. This is so important. I know I can do just as well, but what it teaches you to do, and it's important, I'm an eternal optimist, which sometimes can be quite irritating, but you have to turn in your mind what is a negative into a positive. So actually becoming a fantastic test rider, accuracy, a correct way of going of your horse. If you look at the directives on your dressage sheet, you know, the submission, is the horse swinging over the back? How is the contact? What's the connection? Is your horse supple? Yeah, okay, so perhaps we won't get the 9 or the 8 for the paces, but there is no reason why we cannot gain the same marks in those other directives, the rider mark, that the other horses can achieve. And so many times I have gone into that warm-up and thought, I've got this. I know I've got this because I have my horse's brain on side. I know I can be super accurate, and I know I can ride a mistake-free test.
Yeah.
And now, you know, in reality, I have to have my mindset in that position. I have to believe in myself and my horse, and then that's really important, that you believe in your horse from that. And it is realistic to obtain the same as the warm bloods. Yes, look, they can be bigger swingers and bigger movers for sure, but it means that you're for me it's different. It's not better, it's not worse. It's really important that you believe in your riding, your training, and that development of your horse. And look, like anything in life, judges, of course, they can have favorite types, but that might be it's non-specific. I don't think there's a specific with the warm blood and the thoroughbred. It could easily be the cob, or you'll always, at the end of the day, that it's not as clear cut as knocking a show jump down. It is a personal interpretation of what's in front of them. But you ride for a 7, which is a fairly good, and you're on a 70%. And there is no reason why you cannot achieve your goals with a thoroughbred.
And you just say, I mean, riding nearly every movement, if you're picking a 7 up, how often do people go to a prelim or a novice dressage competition and it's actually won by a low 70% mark, or, you know, sort of hovering around the 70%. So that puts you right up there, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, and you go down the centre line, and if that judge is teetering on 7s, they're much more inclined to give you the odd 8 in, then you have that consistency is really that will come. And yeah, I really think that positive mindset, and that those 7s, aim for 7s, don't be unrealistic, don't aim for a 10 on every movement and then be disappointed. 7s is a 70%, easy to maybe pop the rider mark up, the submission mark. There are lots of places you can get the little gains, the accuracy, a halt. What an easy mark to get. You know, any horse can stand square.
Absolutely. This is going to help us actually to lead on to Dan, where we're going to take our eventing discussion, because this is exactly the same kind of discussion that comes into eventing. And I mean, one can think God, there's a lot of event horses which don't have any sort of movement, but actually it's all about sort of positioning, getting the ring craft right. Dan, you will remember Lucinda Fredericks would be one probably example with a little Headley Britannia, who actually, if anybody saw a trot up with that horse, she was thoroughbred, but the trot to that horse on the horse inspections was non-existent. Yet Lucinda managed to pull out dressage tests that had her in the lead up, Badminton, Burley, with the old scoring, it would now be in the 20s. It was then in the sort of mid 30s, but it's definitely possible, isn't it, Dan, that these horses, you know, can move, or can certainly pull out the test results, certainly just as good as the sort of warm blood and mixed horses in the lineup.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you know, the good thing about eventing is that actually, yes, there are some, you know, warm blood that move really well, but actually, if you look at, I don't know, Michael Jung, La Biostatic Sam, is not a horse that when you see him trotting around, you think, wow. And lots of his horses are not, you know, they don't look like dressage horses, but, you know, it's all down to him and his way of training them. If you look at Mika's tests, they are just super accurate, you know, and you cannot take any points away from him and from his horses. And that's exactly what I try to do. You know, my goal is always to ride a clear round, and the center line needs to be a straight line. The halt needs to be square, needs to be straight. A 20-meter circle has to be 20 meters, not 19 and a half. And that's exactly the same with the horse that moves really well. And I've tested tests myself, and I see a very nice moving horse that does a 19-meter circle that should be a 20. And I'm sorry, but I'm not giving you more than a 6, because that's not a 20-meter circle. And as Cara was saying, you know, doing a square halt, you can train your thoroughbred horse that has a normal trot to do a square halt. And if you trot up the center line and you hold straight and square, that's never going to be less than a 7, and why not an 8?
Absolutely. And I think in eventing, there's a wider issue as well anyway with the thoroughbred, of course. I mean, for me, thoroughbreds are supreme in eventing. I think they will remain so for probably ever and a day. There was a question, though, wasn't there, when the roads and tracks and the steeplechase were ditched, as to whether actually that would place more emphasis on the dressage, the show jumping, and then obviously whether that as a result would drive the warm blood horses. It sort of did, but it seems to have leveled back out again, doesn't it? It seems that we've got even the mixed breed horses, to be honest, have a lot of thoroughbred in them. And really, it hasn't been that huge shift. If anything, the Cell Francais influence to the thoroughbred has helped, but actually those horses are, you know, pure thoroughbred, because Neptune, Collonges, Sprinter Sacra, they're all Cell Francais breeding anyway, aren't they? So the Cell Francais breeding has certainly helped with the movement. But for you, I'm guessing you're the same as me, nothing really will ever replace a thoroughbred for eventing. Well, look, if you look at the 2014 World Equestrian Championship that were in France, the ground, unfortunately, because of the weather, got really bad, and lots of horses were struggling to finish the course, and the ones that were finishing were absolutely knackered. And actually, that's been a big wake-up call for the eventing world. To realize that, oh, actually, you know, we still need the thoroughbreds, we still need the blood. And that's been great, because there have been lots of media attention around it. And in the meantime, you know, the RoR programs, both here in America, in Australia, you know, they started to really sort of being, you know, more known. And now you see, you know, a couple of years ago, I remember looking at the start list of the 5-star in Kentucky, and a third of the starters were thoroughbreds. Yeah. So, you know, I don't know if you've ever been to, you know, if you ever walked the course at Burley horse trials, but I mean, you'd be knackered by the time you finish walking it. You know, leave it alone having to gallop at 590 meters per minute. You know, it's thoroughbreds, for what concerns eventing, in my opinion, have too many advantages. And yes, maybe they won't trot as well as a warm blood. Yes, they maybe won't jump as flashily, and you know, and they won't be as amazingly careful. But you know,
really, we only have to jump up to a 1.30 m course. That's the maximum you have to jump. Plenty of thoroughbred can jump that. The other thing is that thoroughbreds have a natural endurance and a natural stamina. So I've been, in the unfortunate situation of having a small injury 2 weeks before a big event. If I got a thoroughbred, I can afford to lose a couple of cat sessions, because my horse really easily, is really easily fit. It remains fit naturally. With a warm blood, if you miss a couple of canter sessions, you're probably going to have a horse that is not fit enough for a long format event.
Yeah, absolutely. I think anybody that watches the Burleys or the Bramhams or whatever, I think the thoroughbred for the cross country as well, they've got that fifth leg, haven't they? You see it so often, they get it wrong. The warm bloods get it wrong. They're just a fraction slower at getting the leg out of the way, whereas the thoroughbreds do on the whole seem to have that sort of self-preservation beyond others.
Look, what I've always felt is that without being rude against warm-blood, but when a warm-blood starts to be tired, they feel sorry for themselves. You literally feel them saying, I'm dying. I literally cannot go on anymore. You can have a thoroughbred that has broken a leg and he will just carry on going. You've got a thoroughbred that, if it feels tired, he doesn't worry about it. He knows he's got a job to do. He knows the finish line is not there yet, and he just keeps going and he just keeps trying. And for me, riding a tired horse that feels sorry for himself in a long format, it's very hard work for the rider. With thoroughbreds, of course you have to help them. Of course you have to look after them. Of course you have to nurse them at the end of the course if they're tired, but they will carry on trying.
Absolutely. And for everybody thinking, at least they know they've only got to jump a 1.30 m course. I mean, nothing. Absolutely.
Well, if you compare it to, again, if you look at the show jumpers 20, 30 years ago, there were plenty of thoroughbreds.
Yeah.
Plenty of thoroughbreds. And again, I think it's very important to remember that. It's thoroughbreds were almost all of the sport horses until not too long ago. And again, in pure show jumping, they were jumping as big as they jump today. Okay, maybe it wasn't as technical. Okay, maybe it wasn't as light. Okay, there were more fillers and big walls, but the fences were as big and they still needed to leave the poles up.
Yeah, absolutely. And the show jumping perhaps would be the sort of, actually, arguably, perhaps that's the one that they struggle with the most out of the three phases, in fact, now. Because, I mean, we're laughing at you saying about the 1.30 m course, but it is a good point. That's at the top end. And actually the dressage as well, because these are multi-eventers, they are the Jess Ennises, they don't need to be the Mo Farahs or the Usain Bolts. They need to be an all-round athlete. And, in Cara's world, even at badminton, we're only really doing sort of advanced medium movements, aren't we? So there's a lot to do, but in eventing, obviously, they don't need to be perfect in those two disciplines. They just need to get through, and be sort of an adequate level, because the cross country is where things are obviously always going to be brought home. On the show jumping though, Dan, any exercises as a final question to help with that very difficult show jumping element, particularly with a slightly tired horse on a final day?
Yeah, I think before you focus on the jumping action and my horse is not careful, ask yourself if your horse's canter is good enough, because that's where I find where most of the problems are. Lots of X-race horses tend to have a canter that is too big and too spread out and too long, and that's where the flat work can really help. If a horse, they are bred and trained to push forward and cover the ground. That's what they've been trained. That's what they're built to do. If you look at the angles in the hind legs of a show jumper, you look at the angles in the hind legs of a racehorse, they're completely different. So what you need to do is teach them to carry a bit more weight on the back end, to spend a bit more time with the weight on the back end, making sure that they are slightly more uphill, so that when they take off, they will actually naturally go up rather than forward. So lots of work with ground poles, lots of work with cavallettis to improve the canter. For what concerns the jump itself, I would make sure that I always ride them with a good always jump them with a good ground line in front of a fence that just teach them to give themselves a little bit more space and to not jump at the fence, but jump over the fence. I use a lot of poles and cavallettis before and after the fence to make sure that you make sure that the center of the jump is in the center of the fence. Again, that's another big problem. If you look at the shape, it's the center of the top of the jump tends to be too far on the other side of the fence. Therefore, all of a sudden, the front rail of an oxer is in the way. And again, if the canter is not good enough, there's no point in putting poles before and after a fence. They're just not going to be able to use their body, to use their abdominals to bascule over the fence. So, everything that Cara said about working uphill and get those jumping muscles, they're not just useful for the dressage, but, the abdominals, the core, the back, the top line, they are the jumping muscles as well as the muscles that you need to do a nice, medium trot. So the basics are all the same. Improve the flat work on the quality of the canter, and then, of course, help them with simple exercise. But the quality of the canter will improve the jumping.
Okay, and I think that would also apply, not speaking for you, David Ingle, but it would probably also apply for the working hunter work as well, to obviously get the muscles and things improved. Okay, thank you, Dan. Moving on to David Morley, last but definitely not least. David, obviously the other things we spoke about feel like there's a connection. We went from showing, it sort of seamlessly moved into dressage, that moved into eventing. Polo seems to be very different, but is that a misconception that I've got? I mean, we're used to seeing racehorses galloping in a predominantly straight line. We've been talking about how much time is needed to adapt to their new careers in the eventing and dressage and showing world. How are racehorses suitable for polo? Are they indeed suitable? And do they really suit this as a second career?
Very much so. Dan was mentioning that thoroughbreds were the only real competition horses until quite recently. Well, until the Second World War, virtually all polo ponies were thoroughbreds. And it was only the lack of the training of thoroughbreds during the war, and then the availability of South American horses that by nature neck-reined and were sort of ranch horses, that the South Americans took over the supply chain. So they always have been very suitable, and they make the best polo ponies.
Brilliant. Some, as you've just alluded to, some former racehorses have taken to polo very, very well. Can you explain some of the reasons why they took to polo? If you can bring a few case study examples, perhaps. What made them so suitable and so successful?
I think with polo, we tend to have horses that are around 15 hands to 15.2, and there's no limits on size, but because of the nature of what we do playing polo, I think the better type, a nice type of horse, not too big, is always going to find it easier to go through the maneuvers than a big rangy horse. So, for example, I would say all thoroughbreds are fast enough. So that's the one thing you don't need to worry about. So, and I absolutely endorse everything the other panelists have said about building up the muscles, giving them time, routine, and certainly repetition in training to develop something new for them.
Brilliant. And then in terms of, obviously you mentioned the size difference here, and I think that is particularly interesting for polo. Does something about a 5 furlong sprinter that perhaps tends to be in height a lot smaller than a 3 mile chaser, does that make any difference really from your perspective?
Yeah, I find that the out and out sprinters are generally a little hot-headed for us. I prefer a mile and a quarter horse because, as I say, they're all fast enough. And then the other thing is to look at how they move. In polo, people are obsessed with stopping, but actually there's not a great necessity. What you need to be able to do is accelerate, decelerate, and change direction. Stopping is a big waste of energy. So if you have a horse that is naturally very long striding, when you go to slow down quickly, which is such an integral part of polo, you're taking that horse into something that's unnatural. So I would be guided towards a horse that has a reasonably economical pace, because you push them and extend to go fast, but
Right.
you're actually inviting them back home to slow down.
Okay. And in terms of the tack that you start off with, because obviously we see quite a bit of metalwork, obviously in a polo pony's mouth. How do you get to that from a thoroughbred that may only be used to wearing a snaffle? What sort of transition would you take?
Well, we work all of the young horses. When they're being broken, they're all mouthed and lunged or long-reined and introduced to a snaffle and hacked around the farm, around the woods, around the water meadows, and just got used to the environment. So when they come off the track, what we need to do is to get them to pick up that stage. And I'm a great believer that taking on a new horse, especially from another discipline, it's a little bit like moving schools. One needs to say, you may have done that there, but here we do things differently. So if you bring one home from the sales or you buy it directly from the trainer and it's really, really hot, very sort of off its head because it's too full of food, don't try and train that horse. Get it to relax, let it just chill out, because what you don't want is repetition of the horse in the wrong state of mind.
Yeah.
You want to have the horse able and willing to be trained and to be shown what's new in its life.
Excellent advice. So thank you, David. Really good introduction to polo. And you can find out all about all of these disciplines, by the way, on the RoR website. And we're going to now move on to a few questions that have come in during this session. So you have to excuse me, my eyesight, as you can tell, isn't great, and I'm having to read them off the screen. But we've got a few questions, so thank you for those. Cara, this one's for you, and it starts with this anonymous individual saying that she realizes this question is nearly impossible. So good luck. What do you think would be a realistic timeline from novice to GP for an ex-racehorse that came off the track a little older? So he's an 8-year-old, came off the track a little more than a year ago. Is it even a possibility? I don't want to go for the Olympics, but I would like to have some high hopes of climbing the ranks.
Right. Okay. Well, nothing's impossible. So let's try and answer this. The timeline is tricky. It's how long is a piece of string? Now, for an example, my horse went from elementary to Prix George in 18 months. I said that was very quick. It was totally led by him. He was keen. He wanted it. He loved learning. He wanted to learn tricks, and he was super really up for it. He was strong in his muscles. I was lucky. I had done a lot of work for that. Other horses, I would say it can take 6 months from coming off the track to get a really just nice, basic, very simple way of going. So is it possible? Why not? But your horse will tell you how long it takes. So if everything were to go really well and to plan, you could think from novice, and he wanted to do anything to maybe 5 years would be realistic, but that is such a how long's a piece of string question. So from a timeline point of view, and I'm very much that the horse leads me on the timing of it. Is it possible? So every horse has, in fact, it's been proven it's possible. Yes, it's possible. Not every horse is able to do the more advanced movements, and you really need to look at the conformation and the horse's natural ability. You don't want to force the horse into something that it's not physically capable of, because then that's which it will struggle mentally. You'll end up breaking your horse and his soul, which actually for me with the race horses is so, they're such intelligent, keen learners. It's so important that their brain is on side, and I'm very much with you. But if they have a natural ability to collect and they like to learn the tricks, why not? Give it a go.
Absolutely. Good positive optimism. I like actually how that lady as well was actually just skipping intro tests, skipping prelims. She was just going straight at novice level, and off she was going. Good luck to that lady that asked the question. Definitely keep in touch with us as well and let us know how you get on. David Ingle, to you, this question from Catherine Jones. Please, can you explain? Now, you may not be able to explain this on air, actually. We might have to get this explained separately. But actually, the question is about a bigger issue, which I think is quite important. She wants to know why RORs are required to wear shoes all round for showing classes under ROR rules, when that's not required in the pure showing world. But she does also say, do you have any advice to people that have got troublesome feet, because obviously that can be a bit of a trait in the thoroughbreds? Any advice?
Okay, so there's two things there. First of all, to the shoeing in showing classes, some classes in showing you are required to wear shorts all round, and some you're not. So that isn't a straightforward answer. It isn't that they're not necessarily required in showing, because they are. There are some classes that you don't have to be shod all round, and some you do, so that does vary. There's been a big debate about this for many years, and I'm sure it's in other disciplines too. One of the things regarding showing is the judge rides them quite often, and if someone else is the thinking around showing as well has been around, there's lots of other thinking around whether horses should be shod or not. Is when you're going to put someone else on them who doesn't know them, they're literally going to ride them for a minute or two. The safety side of it is quite high on the list, and then I'm sure there's a huge debate that's going to run from that one. But for me, when I can speak from experience, when I sit on a horse and ride it and I don't know it and it hasn't got shoes on, I know straight away. Immediately I can feel that it hasn't got shoes on. And if I'm on grass, it's not safe. On surfaces, okay, possibly safer, but not guaranteed. So if you're riding your horse yourself all the time, there's one thing. If you're expecting other people to get on it and test it out for you and judge you on that performance, then shoes are definitely an added bonus. But clearly there's a lot of discussion going to go on that one. But there is variability in the showing world itself. And there are, I think, ROR have their in-hand classes where they don't need to be shod. We can check that, but I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying the in-hand classes, they don't have to be. And Nick, Mark, you made a really good point that it's a good place to start. So if you want to put your toe in the water, unshod, then start with the in-hand and go from there and see how you get on. Advice on feet, well, I mean, yeah, thoroughbred gets a bit of a hard deal on its feet because, if you look after them, you can make them work for you. Some horses, they suffer from particularly flat feet, I suppose, is what people would say. But I think it's about the feeding. Comes down to the feeding again. Good feeding, appropriate feeding, and maintenance, day-to-day maintenance. I mean, when we had a big yard, our horses' feet we didn't oil them, we greased them. So I had a homemade remedy, which is now actually been produced as an item on the shop shelves. But it was a homemade remedy involving sheep fat actually at the time, and we greased our horses' thoroughbred feet twice a day, inside and out. Every part of the surface was greased every day, and that made a tremendous difference. But there's lots of products and lots of things you can get to help with looking after. It's a bit like someone if you look after your hands and your nails yourself and you maintain them every day, they will look after you. And the same with your feet, and the horse is no different. So really, really important. And your farrier, the relationship with your farrier, absolutely vital. I mean, not just for thoroughbreds, but full stop, particularly if you've got young stock. You know, it can be the making or the breaking of your horse. And very, very important that you get good farriery work and advice. And not all farriers are remedial farriers if they need some help, but your farrier will definitely know one they trust and like to work with. So, you know, get help and don't ignore them. You know, if you tear your nail and you ignore it, it's going to hurt like hell for weeks. It's going to be really difficult. You wouldn't do that to your horse. So look after it. You know, build that. You know, they're going to carry you. So at least you can do is look after their feet for them.
Absolutely. I thought we were segueing into a health and beauty segment and a little bit. So
well, you know,
the next webinar. But no, really good advice there, David. Thank you very much. 2 more questions. So I'm going to get them in. I'm aware we're just going to slightly run over on time, but I think everyone's still with us. So we're just going to go and nobody's got anything better to do. You can't go anywhere. Right. David Morley, this one's for you. We're from Polo Cross and have recently purchased our first racehorse off the track in September. If you could give one piece of advice to us, what would it be?
Take your time. Let your horse acclimatise to what's required slowly, with repetition. And if you don't get the horse fired up and wanting to rush off, and if he ever picks up the bridle, always take a turn. Don't try and change in a straight line. This came actually, Jason, in yesterday's session, talking about mounting and just curving the horse, bending the horse's head round so that if it is going to go off, it goes off in a circle rather than in a straight line. And it is crucial. Always take a turn.
Oh, absolutely. The video you actually just mentioned, it's called Mounting. Jason Webb produced that video. It's a really worthwhile watch. It's on the RoR website and it covers all the problems. It's actually quite a big issue, of course, with the racehorses traditionally being mounted on the move, and he talks all about the sort of issues you might encounter and how to he's got a few tricks. In fact, yesterday he used a hobby horse to demonstrate a few of them, but anyway, worth watching. It's on the RoR website. Thank you, David Morley. Final question, I'll send this one to you, Dan, because it is an eventing question. What are your best tips for teaching a horse to be confident and bold during cross country? Fully understand repetition is key, but is there anything else I can do? And that's from Rachel Lunny.
Yeah, so let's talk about cross country. Most of the horses that have problem with in the cross country are either with ditches, steps, water. That's kind of it. The other big thing is skinnies. Lots of horses, maybe, you know, because they don't have the right training, they run out of skinnies. So I have a very, very simple but very effective way to teach to a horse to make sure your horse is actually very comfortable jumping ditches and going down steps. If a horse can walk over a ditch and can walk down a step, you know your horse is comfortable with those sort of fences. And it's something that lots of people, you know, might not get straight away, but trust me, if you have a horse that is that you think is very confident jumping ditches, ask him to walk over a small ditch. You'll be amazed how many horses actually stop, because they're just used to approach these sort of fences at speed. Lots of people think that, you know, if I approach the ditch as fast as possible, my horse won't even see it and will just step over it. You can get away with that up to a certain level, and even just the B100 level, you know, you will find a couple of combinations where maybe you have a downhill slope coming towards a step or going, you know, over a ditch. And unless a horse is able to drop his head and in the case of a step down, for example, drop his head and just let the body follow the head and pop down, you will always have lots of problems. So for what concerns ditches and steps, walk over ditches, up and down steps until the horse is literally bored of it and doesn't even look at the ditch. It just pops over it. Doesn't even look at the step, just pops over it. The same with the water. Just walk, trot, canter. If you can find a place where the water jump is big enough, have a bit of a dresser session in it. You know, do canter circles in it. If the problem is with skinnies, start with a skinny pole with 2 wings on the side. Make them again walk over the pole, get them used to that small space, make them feel that they can actually fit in there, and then little by little trot over the pole, canter over the pole, add a small fence, trot towards it. Whenever I come towards the skinny, I think only about two things: weight and straight. That's all I think about. If you sit at long stride, never go for it. Just wait for the next one, and your horses will learn to, look for the flags and jump between them.
Okay, weight and straight and take a turn. Loads of good advice, good easy things to remember as well. Thank you, Dan. We do have another question actually that's just come in. I'm going to go to it. And again, Cara, this one's coming to you as just sort of 30 seconds if you could.
Okay.
My thoroughbred is like a different animal since I have been riding him bitless. Why do you think we can't compete in dressage going bitless? And what's your general view on bitless dressage?
30 seconds. Wow. Okay.
I'll give you a minute.
Right. What's my general view on bitless dressage? Gosh. Okay. My first thing I'm saying is I'm not a massive fan of nose pressure. So for me, why would you want to take the bit out? I think that and this is an open question. I think there are lots of very good bitting companies at the moment. There's so much development in the bitting world. I think a correctly bitted horse is not a bad thing. I would probably rather that myself than having putting pressure onto the nose. It's important in dressage that we ride with a connection between the leg and hand so the horse develops that correct way of going. I think with nothing in front, to say I was to ride on a neck strap, for example, which is the other option, I'm going to struggle to develop that connection and for what the judges are going to look for. Personally, I would rather have, as I said, a correct fitting bit that the horse is comfortable in than increasing nose pressure. But there are many roads to Rome, and that's just my opinion. And I think it would be for me a connection issue.
And to be fair, that was a loaded question. That could be a whole different.
I've got a whole night of chat on that, but there you go.
Absolutely. Well, that was really well answered. Thank you very much for that. And obviously, worth pointing out, all of these horses coming from the racing world will start off in a snaffle anyway, won't they? So, at least you've got some sort of starting point there. They're pretty used to having bits in their mouth for a start.
And absolutely, look, a lot of racehorses, a lot of thoroughbreds can be tricky in the contact, and that's one thing. And it's a little bit like the whole loaded gastric ulcers. It needs time. You need to invest in some time and thought about how you make them comfortable and etc. So yeah, that's a whole other session and topic to go into that, which we won't go into now.
Well, we'll definitely have to sort another session next year on these topics because there's a few thrown at you tonight. You've all done a really good job in answering them, so thank you for that. I just want to go through each of you and just get one thing that you absolutely love about a thoroughbred, particularly related to your discipline. So basically, just a quick thing of why they're so suited to your discipline. David Ingle, showing.
I think it's the trust that they put in their riders and vice versa. They just give themselves over to you and say, come on. I think that, they're just so trusting and honest. If you're willing to put the time in, they'll give you so much in return, unlimited.
Right. Excellent. Dan?
So for me, probably four things. The first one is the natural endurance and the stamina. They've definitely got better reflexes and a much better body awareness than thoroughbreds. And for me, that's incredibly important when you are cantering across the country and they have to answer, a tricky question in the mud. They need to have great body awareness. They need to want to do the job, and that's definitely what they do. They do want to do the job.
Thanks, Dan. David Morley.
Yeah, I always say that horses make better partners than servants, and I think the thoroughbred brain is far more fitting to be your partner and much more like-minded with us than the colder-blooded horses. So it's their brain and temperament.
Yeah. I think they make better partners than humans, and that's a whole different webinar where I can tell everybody all about that side of thing. But anyway, Cara, last but not least,
I love their willingness to please and their sensitivity. I think that to have a thoroughbred on side and have the engine underneath you is actually quite unrivaled. Absolutely.
For me, it's all about the partnership, because when you get to know them and they get to know you, it seems to be the turning point, doesn't it? That just takes you seem to have the early struggles, the early sort of troubles you might have to get round, but once there's a turning point, I think, when you get to know them and the partnership, and then eventually, if you get a great thoroughbred, they'll almost feel like they'll do anything for you. So partnership for me. Thank you very, very much, David Ingle, Cara Hayward, Danielle Bizzaro, and David Morley. Thank you. Honestly, I've really enjoyed this evening with you guys. You've been brilliant panelists. Hopefully everybody watching at home has learned something. I certainly have. Loads of tips, and it looks like they're going to have to book all of us again in the new year for another webinar. So thanks, guys. We'll see you very soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a good Christmas.
Indeed.